Andy Richards, Chef Radio, and I have with me today Seren Evans-Charrington. Now, Seren is a food historian who specialises in getting forgotten foods back onto the table. So, Seren, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Andy. Well, I work as a food historian, as you've already explained. And what that means really is that I'm a researcher. So I work as a costumed interpreter, and you can find me at a lot of historical venues and food festivals and various other things in varying costumes depending on the period. And I bring that food to life. I bring the characters from medieval Britain right the way through to frugal 1940s wartime food, and I bring it to life. So what I look at is historically recreating it, accurately recreating it.
Yeah.
But also, what I'm really interested in is getting those old recipes onto the modern table. So helping the modern cook to recreate these dishes, making historical food accessible to the modern table. So that's what I do.
To be in service in those days was an absolutely brilliant thing to do because it gave you a secure career. It gave you a roof over your head, food in your tummy. So the whole thing is that at this time, and we look in the Edwardian period, it was a good, secure role for you. And it was something that secured your future. So, people went into service and they did their whole life serving, and to serve was a good thing. It was a respectable thing, and that was the opinion. These things change, of course, when we get the Second World War hits. We get the First World War. That alters things after. By the time we get to the Second World War, we never go back. So after the First World War, people find it harder to get those sort of people back into domestic service. But the Second World War, nobody wants to go back into domestic service. Women realise that they can earn more money elsewhere. And that's the wonderful things. Things change. So social opinions change. And then I've been doing some research recently, actually, for Curry's PC World. And they have commissioned research into how our kitchens have changed, how our domestic appliances have changed, how long we spend in the kitchen. So everything, as we progress with domestic appliances and we progress with work and we change the way we work, then how we eat changes as well. Now you imagine your kitchen with no electrical supply. If you had an electric cut and it was Christmas dinner, what would you do? You'd probably abandon the idea of Christmas dinner and say, well, I can't possibly cook it. But, going back to these times, these were basically choosing not to have electricity. So none of your hand whisks, none of your stand mixers, none of that's going on. You haven't got your fan-assisted ovens or anything else. They are cooking on ranges, solid fuel, and, they're using things that are traditional. So, they're going to be whisking the sponge. They're going to be, if they're going to make a sponge cake, they're going to be stirring all the Christmas pudding mix or whatever it is that they're going to create with a big wooden spoon. All of that. Now, if you come to make a cake mix nowadays, something like a heavy fruit cake, and you try and stir it by hand, I'll tell you what, it's hard work, isn't it? We're so used to having modern things. So we're looking at something like one of these Christmas feasts would probably be a 15-hour day for one member of staff, but they haven't got just one member of staff, of course. So you're thinking that somebody would put a 15-hour day into that. They're probably going to have had somewhere like that. So, the castle where Downton was filmed, actually at the time, boasted 25 maids, 14 footmen, 3 chefs, and that was in 1912. And then they also had other staff, of course, or the sort of, people like the lamp boy and whatever, as well. But it's amazing what they had. And then if you think about the same time, a place like Longleat, they had a steward, an under butler, a groom of the chambers, a valet, 3 footmen, a pantry boy, a hall boy, a steel boy, who was the one who polished all the silver, housekeeper, 2 ladies' maids, 8 housemaids, 2 sewing maids, 6 laundry maids, a cook, 2 kitchen maids, a vegetable maid, a scullery maid, I take a deep breath, a dairy maid, some grooms, a chauffeur, and, that is an extensive amount of staff. And that shows you how many people it took to run a house like the Doughton. So it then gets us round to the thought that, 15 hours for one person, but of course that would be all the maids. There's 25 maids would all put in that work. All the scullery maids, all the kitchen maids would all be there fully on task, because there were no labour-saving devices. And I think that's the interesting thing about it, is that if you imagine making ice cream without a freezer, as we think of as a freezer. It's such a simple dish like jelly without the aid of a fridge to speed up the setting process. All of these things just makes us realise how lucky we are actually to have all this kitchen gadgetry. I actually went down the process of making a Doughton style feast without using modern appliances. So I didn't use my fridge for setting things or keeping things. I didn't use any of my lovely electrical appliances. I've used a range, so it's as traditional as you can get, as I can replicate in modern terms. And I've recreated a very interesting sort of Doughton style menu. And what I found was, that doing things like the substantial meat pies and the roast game, and then sort of cutting the game chips so that they are so thin that you can see through them, which is exactly what they would have been having. All of these type of things were very time consuming, because when I did sort of like the pies up and things, you've got to make the pastry by hand. You can't just pop it into the food processor to get enough made, and make batches in ahead. You can't chill it down as quickly as you could using a fridge. And that's just the pie part. When I made the pâtés and things up, again, there's no way of whacking all your ingredients in a food processor and pulping it. You can't do that. It's all got to be done by hand. And it's quite a laborious process. Things setting, it took them a lot longer. So literally, it took me to produce all of this working full speed. It literally, at the end of a 15-hour shift, shall we call it, it wasn't complete. It spilled into the next day. So I actually counted it up that if I made the same banquet, which I did exactly the same. The difference was that it had actually taken me 21 hours to prepare using Doughton style, and it actually took me 5 hours to prepare using modern appliances. And the sort of modern appliances that I'm sort of looking at really were things like your stand mixers, your food processors, even sort of, the handheld whisk and things made a huge difference. We are just so lucky, actually. I mean, there's things that have been sort of time honoured, we're still using the sort of the piping bags and all of these sort of things, and there's a lot of things that they saw of as labour saving, like a bean shredder. It's a cast iron sort of device. You put your beans in and you move your little handle back and forth, and it shreds your beans for you. But you know what? It's time consuming. It may have been labour saving for them, but today we are so spoilt because we're just so used to being able to go and use these appliances, and they're wonderful. They cut down a lot of time. They make things a lot easier. I mean, and when we finish, we pop it all in the dishwasher.
We've always been culinary borrowers, so we've always borrowed recipes from other countries. But I think what we've got to look at is we now think we're time strapped. So we think, I haven't got time to prepare. But you know what? If you look at a 1950s housewife, for example, she had to shop in a variety of different stores. Now, you can literally order your shopping online. If you head off to somewhere like a supermarket, you can get everything under one roof, and the ingredients are there in abundance. I think what we've got to do is change the way we think about cooking. I think we've got into a very set routine. We have pasta on one night, pizza on another night. And we've just got into that routine thinking it's quick. But actually, if you did something like, for example, the Sussex Pond pudding, it's steamed for several hours. So it's really quick to make suet pastry. Once you've made that, lined your pudding bowl, got your ingredients in, which in that case is just a lemon, butter and sugar, you've got 2 hours free to get on with something else. So it's all about just getting into the routine of doing things. There's a lot of really good economical cuts of meat and things like that just now just get overlooked just because we've got out of the habit of eating them, or we've decided we don't like the sound of them. We don't eat a lot of offal now. Yet when the celebrity chefs come along and go, this is fantastic, you're going to have oxtail, and they charge us a fortune, we actually go, oh, that's really nice, and we'll pay £20 for a dish of that. But if you go off and get some oxtail and do it yourself, it's a good British dish that just takes not a lot of time to prepare. It's just a slow cook process.
One thing I think that's interesting talking about British food, and you might be able to answer this as a food historian, is what do we actually define as traditional British food? Because, as you said, it's something that's had a lot of global influences. I mean, in a way you could argue actually curry in the form we have it here, in many ways is a British dish. So how do you sort of draw the line?
It's a difficult one because we are great culinary borrowers. We've always looked to other countries and gone, well, I like that, but I'll put a British spin on it. You're absolutely right. The curries and things that we per se have over here, we've put a bit of a spin on it. We've got our sort of Balties and things like that are designed for us. Even things like pizzas and things, if you go to Italy and have a pizza, it's nothing like the pizzas we have over here. We pile them up with that many fillings, So, and we do that with a lot of things. But there are things that are and this is the thing about regional dishes, and this is why it's so important that we hang on to regional dishes. A lot of these regional dishes truly are very British. While they may have a slight influence from other countries coming in, they are essentially, because what they're doing is they're using the very best of those local ingredients. So if you look at, for example, some of the Midlands dishes, for example, you've got the Malvern pudding, which is a baked apple pudding. It's using the best of the orchard fruits that are growing in that sort of Worcestershire area. So using all the orchard fruits up, and it's very much a sort of autumnal dish, but you've got suddenly an abundance of apples and fruit, and it's using it up. So that's really what you can term as a British dish, is when we start looking at, we've got an abundance of fruit here, we've got an abundance of pork perhaps, or we've got an abundance of whatever it be that comes from the local farming, and it gets combined into a dish. And this is how regional dishes occur. I think what we've got out of eating with season, because there is so much choice now. And things like, the Shropshire fidget pie, for example, that should be revived. And I think actually Hairy Bikers, did their little bit for that particular pie, which is simply ham, apples, onions, cider and cheese baked in a pie, great hot, great cold, and get into the way of, even if it's just once a week, have a go at doing a dish that's actually local to your area.
Okay, and you've listed quite a lot of quite interesting dishes here. For any listeners that want to try some of these, where are they able to get hold of them, or are there recipes available?
There are indeed. I think there's some information on the Co-op website, but I think the best place to go is probably lovebritishfood.co.uk. So that's lovebritishfood.co.uk. You should find some interesting, names of recipes and some of the research on there as well.
Seren Charrington-Hollins is on the phone, a food historian. Hello, Seren.
Hello.
Does this sound right to you? People stashing treats?
Well, I have heard of people concealing them in their sock drawers or zipping them in their handbags before.
In a handbag, fair enough.
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? But it seems that biscuits are what we would call an iconic food. You mention biscuit to anybody, they know what you're talking about. So if I said digestive to you, for example, which had a birthday yesterday of 125 years, but if I said digestive, you know exactly the biscuit I'm talking about.
Of
so
course.
It's iconic. And the thing that iconic foods all have in common with one another is they tend to have the sugary fat content, and that's what we crave. So, for example, you've never thought to yourself, I feel stressed out to death or a little bit down. I know what I'll have, a nice celery stick.
Yeah.
We just don't do it.
That is true, isn't it? Yeah, no one's going to be stashing celery or salad anywhere,
I hope not. There might be some listeners that would. But, you don't think to yourself, I'll have something nice and healthy. What is absolutely a celery stick? I'll have a stick of cucumber, that's what I'll have. Nobody does it. We tend to crave the comfort foods. And the comfort foods, as a result, tend to be the ones that become iconic. So things like, biscuits, pies, even things like Waldorf salad, they have quite a high fat content,
Cakes is another one, isn't it? My dad tells this great story. He's one of 4 brothers, and his one brother used to, whenever the cakes arrived, he'd lick his favourite one so that no one else could have it.
Oh my goodness! Well, it's strange because McVitie's did this survey, didn't they, for National Biscuit Day, and some of the research that they found was quite amusing. I felt it was anyway. The average Brit buys 45 biscuits a month, and I was thinking, well, that sounds about right to me. But 82% of people surveyed would rather stay at home with biscuits than go out with their mates or on a date.
Well, they need to get a life, frankly.
They do.
Rather than hiding their biscuits in bedside tables and sock drawers.
Or maybe they're looking for them. That's maybe why they want to stay at home.
They've forgotten where they've hidden their biscuits.
Yeah, they've forgotten where they put them.
I mean, what about... So it's not just biscuits. So it's like you said, it's all the sweet stuff, isn't it? That's the stuff that you don't want other people in the house to get their mitts on.
Well, you mentioned cakes. Sweets are the other one, aren't they? And I think it's quite a common thing. I actually was looking last year into a survey that was done about what Brits take away with them on holiday, and we take all sorts of comforts like tomato sauce and goodness knows what with us,
tea
gravy
bags,
granules. And what I was thinking about this is the same thing, isn't it? It's a comfort thing. It's a security thing. So it isn't about I'm going to eat this in private when nobody's about. It's really about the idea of having it there. So it's almost like an instinct, if suddenly there's no more food in the world, at least I've got a packet of jelly beans hid behind the baked beans.